What's up, guys, and welcome back to an episode of 30 in 30. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about when to reverse during contest prep. Now, I've talked about this a lot in the past, that muscle loss is essentially a physique competitor's worst enemy. I feel like a lot of us have a bad habit of dieting all the way up until the show and then trying to carb up at the last second, hoping for a prayer that we fill out. Well, I'm here to tell you that maybe that's not necessarily the best strategy, and that actually reversing into your shows might be a better strategy if you can plan it out and if you cannot rush your prep like a lot of people do. So this year, although it is already January, I have a lot of people dieting for shows in the summer and even shows in the fall. And why am I doing that? Well, I don't necessarily believe in like 12 or 16 week preps like a lot of people do. I believe in a little bit longer prep to slow the rate of loss, to spare muscle loss, but also to allow us to reverse leading into the show at the end of the year, whenever it is. So that's what we're focusing on in today's episode. But how do you know when to reverse? So obviously we have to lose a significant amount of weight in order to get damn near show ready. If we are losing steadily on our macros for a long time, for example, like I did this past year, and I got to roughly, I got just under 170 pounds, so I was like 168, 167 pounds on a given day. I did see 166 on one day, which I got very lean. I didn't necessarily get crazy emaciated like I did in the past because I felt like my diet methods were a little bit superior this time around. But I knew that I didn't want to be 166 pounds for the rest of the year, because I knew that going into the world contest that I was going to be doing, I needed to be a lot fuller going into these shows. So how do you get more full, as a lot of people will tell you? Well, some people may try to load on an exorbitant amount of carbs one day out and hope that they magically fill out. While that may work to a certain extent, there is a lot of guesswork that goes into that. Just because you don't essentially know how many carbs your body can handle. And I've heard people pushing, 1,200, 1,400, 1,600 grams of carbohydrates the day before. And yeah, you might be able to physically process all those carbs, but are they going to be put to use and stored? No, you end up excreting a lot of that out, and that's just going to cause a lot of bowel discomfort the day before a show or in the morning of, which in my opinion you don't need. Excuse me. So how do you fill out your muscles leading into a show? Well, you start reversing. And I'm not talking about a day out, I'm talking about weeks out. So we need to get to a point where we're very lean, and maybe our weight loss has stalled after a few cuts. Although my weight loss did not stall this year. When I got down to that point, I got down to a point of my conditioning where I was like, okay, I know I'm probably going to be one of the leanest, if not the leanest guys on stage, but I know that I need to gain a little bit more size if I want to contend. So what I did right out of the gate was increase my carbohydrates by 50 to 80 grams. This is what I did personally. I increased them by 50 to 80 grams, and I waited about a week to see what happened. My weight held relatively the same, maybe increased a little bit. Then I gave myself another 50 to 80 gram bump. And I did that for a couple weeks in a row. And yes, my weight did eventually start to rise over time, but I started to look more muscular. And that gave me in my opinion, a much better look leading into my last contest. Now, did I go a little bit too overboard leading into the last couple shows of the year? Potentially. So there is a middle ground. I will admit that there is a middle ground between reversing too much and losing a little bit of conditioning for the sake of fullness. But I do think that if you were to find that middle ground, that it's going to lead to a much more superior look than just trying to load with a bunch of carbs the day before a show. Because that's more of a superficial, it's like blowing air into a balloon, and then that could dwindle over time. Instead, when you're actually reversing, you are gaining new tissue, and then yes, you can load with that new tissue as well. So you could push more carbohydrates into that new tissue. Just because when we do lose muscle mass over the length of our prep, we look a little bit smaller. So if we allow ourselves to actually reverse, we could gain back some of that lost tissue, fill ourselves out a little bit more, and look better. So when would be an appropriate time to reverse? I would say at minimum 3 weeks before your show is the appropriate time to start reversing. That'll give you enough time to increase your carbs once or for sure twice leading into the show to allow to see how you respond. Ideally, if you could do it a little bit more, if you could push that 4th or 5th week, that would be fantastic. What I've seen over time is that the people who find that middle ground, like I said, I might have screwed up a little bit to myself this year, but that's because I tend to experiment on myself and I want to see how much you can actually push. The people who find that middle ground, who maybe don't do as big of increases as I did, maybe they only increase their carbs like 20 to 50 grams in a given bump, they look better, they look leaner because maybe they are gaining a little bit more tissue. Their cortisol levels are probably dropping because they're actually eating more food, and they look harder. So those are kind of the benefits of reversing into a show. And you could kind of tell the people who have done this in the past, obviously they're a little bit more experienced because they've done the method of dieting down into the show and then trying to do this magical carb up. And I feel like a little bit more advanced people are starting to do this over time, where they know that if they could start bringing their food up before the show 3-4 weeks out, they're going to look a lot better on show day than if they just crash dieted themselves the day before the show, said a prayer, ate a bunch of carbs, and saw what they look like on stage. So guys, if you're out there and you're looking to compete, I would strategically plan a reverse period 3 or 4 weeks out leading into your show to help you, not only look bigger, your cortisol levels will drop, so you might even look better, you might even look harder from doing so. So that's it for today's videos, guys. Tune in tomorrow for another episode of 30 and 30. I'll see you then.